I moved onto the farm in late August 2016, hired to manage things while the owner recovered from a stroke. The place sat in eastern Iowa, miles of corn and hog buildings stitched together by gravel roads and drainage tiles. I had grown up around farms, so nothing about it felt new at first. The work was routine: feed schedules, fence checks, pumps. The land was flat enough that you could watch weather come at you for an hour before it arrived. Behind the main hog barns sat a manure lagoon, an oval pit dug decades earlier and lined with clay. It held waste from the barns and runoff after rain. The surface looked calm most days, a dull skin that reflected the sky. The smell came and went depending on wind. Everyone treated it with caution, but it was part of the landscape, as ordinary as the bins and silos. The owner had left notes about the lagoon. Monitor levels. Watch the banks after storms. Keep the pump shed locked. Nothing unusual. I checked it every evening, walking the perimeter and scanning for erosion. The ground around it stayed soft, even in dry weeks, but that was expected. The first sign that something was wrong came at night. I lived in a small house near the barns, close enough to hear fans and feeders. Around midnight, after everything settled, I began hearing low sounds from the direction of the lagoon. Not splashing, more like a slow release of air, a deep gurgle that rose and fell. At first, I blamed temperature changes or pressure in the pipes. Then the bubbles appeared. I saw them one evening just before dark. The surface of the lagoon swelled in several spots, then broke with a thick roll, releasing gas that carried a sharp, rotten edge. The bubbles came in patterns, spaced apart, moving slowly from one end of the pit toward the other. I logged it and moved on. Over the next week, the bubbling increased. It happened every night, always after the barns quieted down. The surface shifted like something was pushing from below. The banks began to slump in small sections, clods sliding into the water without splash. I kept my distance. Manure pits kill people. One wrong step and you are gone, overcome by gas or pulled under by suction. I wore a mask when I checked levels and stayed upwind. One night in early September, I heard something else. Footsteps on gravel near the pump shed. Slow and careful. I shut off my porch light and watched through the window. A shape moved near the shed, hunched and deliberate. The lock held. The figure lingered, then moved toward the lagoon, keeping low. I did not go outside. The night carried sound too well. I watched until the shape faded into the dark. The next morning, the shed door showed fresh scratches around the lock. The ground near the lagoon had been disturbed, boot prints leading along the bank and stopping where the clay had cracked. I reported it through the proper channels. Trespassers were not unheard of, but the area was remote. The bubbling worsened. On the third week, a section of the bank collapsed inward, taking a strip of grass and soil with it. The lagoon level dropped slightly, then stabilized. I could see exposed layers of clay where water had eaten through. The smell grew heavier at night, thick enough to sting eyes. I stopped checking after dark. I stayed inside and listened. The gurgling turned into a low roar at times, like distant machinery. The sound traveled through the ground and up into the house. One night, a loud crack split the air. I felt it through the floor. I rushed to the window and saw the lagoon surface heave, then settle. The bubbles rose in a line toward the far bank. The smell was overwhelming, even from a distance. At first light, I approached cautiously. A long fissure had opened along the far side of the pit. Mud and waste had drained into a lower field, leaving behind a slick channel. The bank was unstable, ready to give way. I marked the area and called for emergency inspection. The inspectors arrived later that day. They walked the site, took samples, and measured gas levels. Their readings spiked near the fissure. Methane, hydrogen sulfide, dangerous concentrations. The lagoon had become unstable. The explanation came together piece by piece. Someone had been dumping waste into the pit at night. Not manure. Industrial sludge, heavier and reactive, likely from a nearby operation trying to avoid disposal costs. The added material changed the chemistry of the lagoon, increasing gas production and pressure. The bubbling was gas seeking release. The cracks were the banks failing under strain. The trespasser I saw had been part of it, using the cover of darkness and the assumption that no one watched a manure pit closely. The pump shed was the access point. The lagoon was never meant to hold that volume or type of waste. The danger was immediate. A full collapse could have released enough gas to kill anyone nearby and flooded fields with toxic slurry. The farm was shut down. Emergency crews vented the pit and reinforced the banks. The dumping trail was traced back through tire marks and residue. Charges followed. I moved out within a month. The farm changed hands after the cleanup. The lagoon was drained and filled, replaced with a line system built to modern standards. The horror of that place did not come from mystery. It came from neglect and greed, from someone treating a living landscape like a hiding place. The sounds I heard at night were pressure building toward failure. The shape near the shed was a person betting that no one would look too closely. I still remember the way the ground felt under my boots near the pit, soft and breathing, like it could give way at any moment. The farm looked calm in daylight, rose straight and clean, but beneath it, something was breaking apart, waiting for the right moment to surface. I went to the farm because I needed quick cash. Late March 2014. Days were warming but nights still dropped below freezing. I was between warehouse jobs, sleeping on a friend's couch in North Platte, counting change before buying food. The ad was handwritten on lined paper, thumbtacked to a gas station corkboard between lost dog notices and a church dinner flyer. Short-term work, cash paid weekly, cattle farm, directions only, no phone number. I copied the route onto a receipt and folded it into my wallet. The drive took almost an hour past the last grocery store and the last working payphone. The land flattened until the horizon felt too wide. Fields still brown from winter, ditches full of gray snowmelt. The road turned to gravel for the final stretch. Dust followed my car even at low speed. I passed one mailbox leaning at an angle with no name on it. Then another snapped off at the base. The farm appeared all at once. Low buildings spread out like pieces dropped without care. A single-story house with faded siding. Several sheds. A long barn. A windbreak of dead-looking trees bent away from the constant wind. The owner met me outside the house. Older, thin, clothes clean but worn to the softness of repeated washing. He looked at my car longer than he looked at me. I was told what the work involved and shown where I could sleep. A small room off the mudroom that smelled like boots and bleach. I agreed because the money was enough and because I did not have options. The days followed a simple pattern. Up before sunrise. Feed calves from plastic buckets. The calves were young, ribs visible, eyes too large for their heads. Their breath fogged the air. Some coughed. Some did not stand when I entered and had to be nudged until their legs worked again. I cleaned stalls with a shovel worn thin along the edge. The manure froze overnight and came up in heavy chunks that rang when they hit the wheelbarrow. My gloves stiffened with cold and never fully dried. There were several sheds scattered behind the barn. Most held equipment. One stored feed. One held empty pens with rusted gates. One stayed locked at all times. That shed sat farthest from the house, closer to the fields, its metal siding darker than the rest as if it absorbed light. A heavy chain wrapped through the handles. The padlock looked new, bright against the dull metal. I smelled it before I stood near it. Not manure, not feed. Something sharp and sour layered under a strong chemical smell that burned the nose. Disinfectant used too often to hide something else. Each evening I was expected to lock the sheds before dark. The sun fell fast out there. The wind picked up as soon as the light thinned. I saved the locked shed for last because it unsettled me. The smell seemed stronger at night, carried low by the cold. On the first evening I noticed a mark on the metal wall, a shallow dent about chest height. I assumed equipment had hit it. That night, after I finished and walked back toward the house, I heard movement from that direction. Not a crash, not scratching. A slow sound like pressure applied and released. Metal flexing. It happened once, then again. The noise traveled through the air without urgency. I stood still until it stopped. I convinced myself it was an animal shifting weight inside, something large leaning against the wall. The pattern continued. Each night after sundown, once the yard went quiet, the shed made that sound. Always after dark, always slow. I checked the chain every time. Stayed tight. The padlock stayed closed. When the wind blew, the sound changed, but the pressure remained steady, deliberate, as if timed. The owner kept to his routine. He stayed inside most of the time. Lights went on early. Lights went off early. He watched from the window when I crossed the yard, his shape framed by yellow light. I avoided looking back. I focused on the work. I told myself that farms held unpleasant things. Sick animals, injured livestock, equipment that failed. People made choices to deal with those things quietly. By the third day, I noticed details I had missed. The locked shed had no windows. The vents near the roof were covered with mesh, newer than the rest of the building. A hose ran toward it from the pump house. The ground near the door stayed damp even on dry days. I found footprints near the entrance that did not match my boots or the owner's. Smaller, uneven, drag marks between steps. Sleep came in pieces. The wind rattled the house. The smell clung to my clothes even after washing. My hands stayed cracked and sore. On the fourth evening, the temperature dropped hard after sunset. The sky cleared. Stars burned sharp. I locked the first sheds quickly and walked toward the last one with my head down. The padlock lay in the dirt. It rested near the door as if placed there. The chain hung loose. I picked it up without thinking and felt heat through my glove. Not sun-warmed, body-warm. The metal left a faint, greasy mark on the fabric. The smell poured out stronger now, layered with something human that I recognized without wanting to. Sweat trapped too long. Infection. Waste. The door stood shut but not secured. The metal bowed slightly outward from inside. The slow pressure came again, closer now, strong enough to make the wall creak. I dropped the chain. I did not touch the door. I stepped back until my heel hit a rock and I nearly fell. I stood there breathing hard, counting my breaths, listening to the sound continue, then stop. I walked away without finishing the task. I did not look back. Inside the house, the lights were already off. I stayed awake until morning, sitting on the edge of the bed with my boots on. I left before sunrise. I did not collect the rest of the money owed. I did not leave a note. I drove until the gravel turned to pavement and then farther, stopping only when the smell seemed gone from the car. 2 months later, I saw the listing online while searching for work. The farm was for sale. Photos showed empty buildings. The text said all livestock removed. The price was low. Comments mentioned a quick sale. I did not need more than that. But later, after I settled into another job, I searched local records out of a need to understand what I had walked away from. The county site listed a notice filed weeks after I left. Animal welfare inspection, unsanitary conditions, improper containment. One human occupant found living inside an outbuilding without utilities. The report stated the person was related to the owner. Long-term illness, isolation chosen to avoid costs and attention. The occupant had been restrained for safety during episodes. The language stayed careful, legal. The shed had not held an animal. It had held a person kept alive and hidden. The pressure against the walls had been weight shifted in pain and frustration. The disinfectant had been used to manage infection and smell. The warmth on the chain had come from hands that had just touched it, testing freedom. The owner sold the property after the investigation. The person was moved to care. The land returned to fields that looked no different from the road. I think about that place when the temperature drops at night and metal contracts with sound. I remember how easily I accepted the routine and how quickly I learned to ignore signs. I remember how needing money narrowed my view until I could walk past a locked shed and not open the door. There were 4 of us, fresh out of college, drifting through that hollow space after graduation where nothing had weight yet. Jobs were lined up but distant. The weekend felt free. One of us had an uncle with land in southern Illinois, and the place was offered without conditions. A farmhouse at the edge of a soy and corn operation, empty after harvest days, with an old hunting cabin attached by a breezeway. October 2017. When the air turns sharp after sunset and the ground smells like broken stalks and diesel. The drive down cut through miles of flat fields. Corn stood dry and yellow, leaves curled tight. Soybeans had already been taken off in some sections, leaving rows of chopped stems and dark soil. The farm itself sat alone, a rectangle of buildings and bins against a horizon that never rose. No trees except a thin windbreak near the house. The sense of distance was physical. You could feel how far you were from other people. The farmhouse was older than it looked from the road. The paint was fresh but uneven. The porch boards flexed. The attached cabin had been used for hunters, with metal bunks and a small bathroom that smelled of iron and old water. We dropped our bags and walked the fields while there was light. The ground was uneven from equipment ruts. Corn rows stretched so far they bent the eye. Every sound carried. That first evening settled quiet. The sky went flat and gray. After dark, the fields did not go silent the way woods do. The corn made noise even when there was no wind. It was not a rustle. It was a shifting, low and deliberate, like something brushing stalks aside near the ground. It moved in lines. It stopped and started. At first it blended into the background the way farm noise does. Trains far off. Grain dryers, a distant engine. Then it repeated too close to ignore. We chalked it up to deer. There were tracks everywhere near the barn and along the fence lines. Hoof prints pressed deep into the soil. Some were wrong. They were wider than a deer's. The toes splayed. The depth suggested weight. One line of tracks dragged on one side, cutting a shallow trench between steps, as if whatever made them leaned hard to one side or carried something heavy. We followed them for a while, then stopped when they angled toward the far field. The uncle had left a warning before the weekend. Not a story, not a joke. A simple instruction to stay out of the far field near the old grain bins. Equipment had gone missing over the years. We assumed theft, maybe people cutting locks or kids looking to mess around. The bins sat far from the house, rusted and unused, with weeds climbing their bases. In daylight, they looked harmless. At dusk, they drew the eye in a way that felt wrong. The first night passed without incident. Sleep came in short stretches. The cabin cooled fast. The metal bunks creaked with every shift. Outside, the fields kept moving. The sound did not circle the house. It stayed in the rows, like something pacing along straight lines it already knew. The second day was bright and cold. We explored the barn. Old tools hung on pegs. The concrete floor was stained dark where oil had soaked in for decades. Near the back wall, fresh marks cut across the dust. Wide arcs that suggested something heavy had brushed past stored equipment. There were bent fence staples on the ground. A section of wire had been pushed down and trampled. By late afternoon, the sky lowered again. We cooked inside and cleaned up early. No one said much. The feeling had shifted from novelty to awareness. Every noise had shape. After dark, the movement returned, closer than the night before. The sound traveled fast, then stopped. It did not circle, came straight toward the house. At some point, well after midnight, something ran along the outside wall. It was fast and heavy, the footfalls dull and spaced. The vibration came through the floor. It did not scrape. It did not stumble. It stopped directly beneath the window of the room where we slept. The window was closed and dark. The curtains hung still. There was no sound after it stopped. No breath, no sniffing, no shift of weight, just the sense of mass held in place. I lay there with my eyes open, counting seconds, then minutes. My body stayed tight, waiting for sound to return. It did not. The stillness pressed harder than movement. Whatever stood there knew the house. It knew the height of the window. It knew where to stop. After a long stretch, the presence withdrew. The footsteps did not resume at speed. They faded, slow and deliberate, back into the rows. Morning light showed the damage clearly. Along the fence line near the house, the corn was flattened in a straight path, waist-high, as if something had passed through upright without forcing its way down. The stalks were bent, not snapped. Leaves were brushed aside. The path led away from the house toward the far field and the old bins. The tracks were deeper here, the dragged line cut clean through soft ground. The print showed a split hoof, wide and blunt, with the outer edge chewed and uneven. We did not need to discuss leaving. We packed and loaded in silence. On the drive out, we stopped near the bins to look from a distance. The ground around them was torn up. Mud smeared the metal. A section of sheet metal had been peeled back near the base of one bin. Inside, spilled grain had drawn animals in for years. The missing equipment made sense now. It had been dragged, knocked over, bent, not stolen. A large feral hog had claimed the place. Southern Illinois had pockets where wild hogs moved through, escaped stock that bred and spread. They were smart, aggressive, and heavy. A big boar could weigh hundreds of pounds. An injured leg would explain the drag. Their tusks could peel metal. They traveled fields at night using rows like corridors. They learned buildings. They tested windows. They stood still when listening. The uncle knew. The warning was enough. The risk was not theft. It was an animal that did not fear structures and had learned to use them. By staying near the house, by not going to the far field, we reduced the chance of crossing its path in the open. That second night, it had come to check the house anyway, following scent and routine, stopping under the window because it had done so before with no consequence. We left early and drove north with the sun climbing behind us. None of us joked. The explanation did not drain the feeling away. It made it heavier. The sounds had shape now. The tracks had weight. The presence under the window had a body attached to it, one that could break bone and move without noise when it chose. The farm returned to its quiet routines after we left. The fields kept shifting at night, low to the ground, along straight lines that went on forever. My name is Daniel H., and the farm had been my grandfather's as long as I could remember. He died in the winter of 2009, and the land passed to me by default. No one else in the family wanted it. The place sat in rural eastern Kentucky, folded into steep hills that pressed close on every side. Cell service dropped the moment you turned off the state road. The gravel drive ran narrow and rutted, climbing through trees before opening into a shallow bowl where the house and barn sat. I moved in that spring thinking it would be temporary. I was broke between jobs and the property taxes were low. The house was plain but solid. The barn was older, built from rough timber darkened by age and oil. It leaned slightly downhill, held upright by habit more than design. The air around it always smelled damp, even in summer. The locked stall stood at the far end of the barn. I noticed it on the first day. The boards were thicker than the rest of the stalls, the wood older, gray, and tight-grained. The door was reinforced with a crossbeam bolted through the planks. A heavy padlock hung from a hasp that had been replaced more than once. The nails around the frame caught my eye. They were bent inward, the heads chewed and flattened, like they had been driven from the inside and forced back. It made no sense. You build a stall to keep animals in, not to keep something from getting out. I assumed it was something my grandfather never finished removing. He had been stubborn and private. He did things his own way. The rest of the barn held empty pens and old equipment. Dust lay thick. Cobwebs bridged corners where swallows used to nest. Inside the house, I started going through drawers and cabinets, clearing space. In a built-in shelf behind the kitchen, I found a stack of journals bound with twine. They were my grandfather's, written in a steady hand that grew shakier over the years. Each book covered a season. Most entries were simple notes about weather, planting, feed. Then there were the losses. Sheep lost, 2 pigs lost, calf lost, no cause listed, just the word lost, underlined once. The entries stretched back decades. Sometimes months would pass with nothing noted. Then a cluster of losses would appear close together. Even a horse, written once, the line pressed hard enough to tear the paper. There were no mentions of coyotes, dogs, bears, or thieves. In that area, you knew what took your animals. You wrote it down. My grandfather did not. I spent the first year fixing fences and clearing brush. I never kept livestock. I could not afford it, and the land felt tired. Still, I walked the barn every evening before dark. The locked stall stayed closed. The padlock rusted but held. One night in late October, after a long day cutting fallen trees along the drive, I heard movement inside the barn. It was well after dark. I was in the yard, rinsing mud from my boots with a hose. The sound was slow steps on packed dirt, careful, evenly spaced, not the scramble of raccoons or the flutter of birds. It stopped when I froze. I stood there with the hose dripping, listening. The sound came again, one step, then another, then a pause. I grabbed a flashlight from the porch and crossed the yard. The barn door stood closed, the latch hooked as I always left it. I shined the light through the cracks. Dust hung in the beam. The sound came from the far end. I did not open the door. My hand rested on the latch, and I could not make it move. The steps stopped. The quiet pressed back in, thick and heavy. I backed away and locked myself inside the house. Sleep did not come. Morning showed no tracks outside the barn. Inside, the dirt was scuffed near the locked stall. The padlock lay on the ground, snapped clean through the shackle. The door stood open. The space inside was empty, but the floor told a story. The dirt was churned into a shallow trench that ran the length of the stall, worn smooth by countless passes. The walls were scratched at shoulder height. Old stains marked the boards, dark and uneven. It smelled sour and human. I understood then what my grandfather had been writing around. He had been losing animals because someone had been taking them. Not all at once. Over time, quietly, someone who lived close enough to know routines and far enough to stay unseen. The hills around the farm were cut with old mine entrances and hollows that never showed on maps. People disappeared into them. Some never came back out. The locked stall had not been for animals. It had been a place to contain a person. Not permanently, not well. The bent nails made sense now. The reinforcement was added after the fact. The journals made sense too. Lost meant taken, and he had chosen not to write the rest. I called the county sheriff, but there was nothing to show by then. No prints, no proof, just an empty stall and a broken lock. I fixed the door and put on a new padlock. I did not go into the barn after dark again. Over the next months, small things went missing. A gas can, a coil of rope, food from the pantry when I forgot to lock the door. I found a bedroll tucked into brush near the creek, then gone a week later. The steps returned some nights, always slow, always careful, circling but never coming close. I listed the land the following spring. It sold within 6 months to a man from out of state who wanted privacy. He bulldozed the barn first thing, pushing the old timber into a heap and burning it where it lay. The locked stall vanished under the blade. The ground churned and leveled. I felt relief watching it go. After the sale closed, I moved away. The buyer never called me after moving in. Months passed, then a year. I heard through the county that he left suddenly. Equipment abandoned. House locked. The land went back on the market. Nothing supernatural lived on that farm. Just a person who learned to survive by staying hidden, who used the barn as shelter and the livestock as food, who paced the stall for years waiting out storms and seasons. My grandfather had chosen to contain the problem instead of exposing it, locking the door and writing lost in his journals. When he died, the lock held for a while. Then it failed, and the hills took back what they always kept. This was summer 2020, when the days blurred together and every plan felt suspended. Lockdown had stripped time of shape. I needed money and something that felt real. An online posting caught my attention because it offered high pay for night work, no experience required, on a livestock farm somewhere in northern Texas. The details were thin. The address would be provided the day of. The job description was short. Patrol fences. Log activity. Do not interfere. The animals had been spooked. 3 of us answered it. We were not friends before that week, just people pulled together by boredom and rent. We met in a grocery store parking lot outside Wichita Falls and followed a pin drop to our phones. The road thinned, then broke into caliche and dust. Cell service fell away in bars, then vanished. The land flattened into long stretches of pasture cut by mesquite and scrub. Heat lingered even after sunset, a low pressure that pressed against skin. The farm appeared without warning. A gate set back from the road, a long drive, a cluster of low buildings around a central yard. A small cabin stood off to one side, a simple structure with a porch light and a metal roof. That was where we were told to base our patrols. The owner stayed out of sight. Instructions were delivered quickly. Then we were left alone with a logbook, radios that barely worked, and a map of fence lines. The cattle were spread across several large pastures. They were quiet animals used to open land. As night settled, we took positions along different sections of fence and walked slow loops, shining lights, listening. The air buzzed with insects. Distant trucks moved along a highway we could not see. It felt empty in a way that made sound carry. Not long after full dark, I noticed something that did not sit right. The cows were all facing the same direction. Not clustered, not grazing, just standing, heads lifted, bodies angled toward the same tree line at the edge of the property. They did not move. They did not lie down. Their tails hung still. I walked closer, careful not to startle them. Their eyes reflected pale in my light, fixed and wide. I marked the time and location in the log. The pattern held across the pasture. Wherever I went, the animals oriented the same way. It was not wind. It was not a vehicle. The night was still. Hours passed like that. The patrol loops became routine. Each pass brought me back to the same site. The cabin sat quiet behind me. Around 2:30 a.m., the night broke. The sound came from the tree line. It rose fast, sharp and loud, then dropped into a low, pulsing scream that carried across the fields. It did not sound like a coyote or a bobcat. It had weight behind it, a force that pushed air. The cows reacted as one. They bolted, bodies slamming into motion, hoofs tearing at ground. Wire snapped. Fence posts leaned and fell. The herd poured through the break, dust lifting in thick clouds. I froze for a second, then moved along the fence, light swinging, heart hammering. The sound cut off as suddenly as it started. The night rushed back in, full and loud. I found the break where the wire had been torn loose. The ground there was soft from recent watering, and the impressions were clear. They were deep and wide, three-toed. Each print sank far into the soil, the edges clean, the toes splayed. The spacing between them was wrong for anything human. The stride was too long, the weight too heavy. The pattern ran parallel to the fence for a stretch, then angled toward the trees. There were drag marks where something had brushed low branches aside. We regrouped near the cabin as dawn crept up, pale and thin. No one spoke much. We logged what we saw. The owner appeared then, moving fast, face set. We were told to clock out early. Cash was counted into our hands. The instruction not to interfere made sense now. Whatever moved out, there was not something to chase or confront. We drove away as the sun climbed, dust trailing behind us. The land looked ordinary in daylight. Pastures, fences, trees. The cattle were being gathered, the broken wire already cut away. By the time we reached cell service, the posting was gone. The page would not load. The contact number rang dead. Later, after some distance and sleep, the explanation settled into place. Northern Texas holds many private ranches that keep exotic animals. Emus and ostriches are legal in some counties, bred for meat, oil, or novelty. An emu stands tall, runs fast, and leaves three-toed tracks with long strides. Its call can sound like a deep drum or a scream, unfamiliar and unsettling if you have never heard it at night. They spook cattle. They test fences. They do not belong near cows after dark. The owner had likely lost control of one or more birds. Maybe a pen failed. Maybe a gate was left open. Rather than report it and risk fines or seizure, he hired night patrols to log activity and keep distance. When the bird broke free and the fence failed, the risk rose too high. Paying us off and wiping the listing was cheaper than exposure. I still think about the way the cows stood before the sound, all facing the same direction, reading something we could not. Animals know when a shape does not fit the land. the memory of those prints stays sharp, pressed into mud under a Texas sky that felt too wide for comfort. The explanation fits, clean and complete, but it does not soften the night. It only gives it a name.